Today I want to show you something called Chaos Cloth. It's a very exciting new concept that was, I think, introduced in Unreal Engine 5.3, and in 5.4 they've sort of refined it, and it is something akin to follower clothing that we know from DAZ Studio inside of Unreal Engine. It can be used for conforming clothing as well as stuff with cloth dynamics. Very exciting stuff. Let me show you how it works here on this very simple example. I've got two custom characters here that I've sent over from the bridge, and the one on the left has the merged clothing into her body, and the one on the right has the Chaos Cloth conforming clothing. And you can see that there is no poke through on the figure on the left, sorry, on the right. The figure on the left has some poke through here, and they have exactly the same animation applied. It happens on the front as well as the back. If we look closely, it's poking through every once in a while, and that's annoying because it's tricky to fix that, because that poke through doesn't really appear in the A-pole. So as you come to fixing that in Blender, it's always tricky to see, well, where is this actually happening. But the figure on the right doesn't have that, and that's because this is a blueprint. This is just the skeletal mesh, the merged mesh as it comes in from DAZ Studio, and this one is a blueprint that I can show you here. This is what it looks like. So it looks pretty much like a normal scene would. It's a regular blueprint actor here, and all I have is a skeletal mesh that is the nude character, and then I have these two Chaos Cloth components, one for the pants and one for the jacket. And the cool thing now is I can actually swap these things out. So this is a clothing asset here. I think I also have the yoga clothing. I could just go and swap that out, and then takes a second, and then we have different clothing. And so it does not require you to go and create a new modular character every time you send that over. You can just swap them out like you would in DAZ Studio. So follower clothing, very, very cool concept. And there is something else that comes with Chaos Cloth, namely something that is real-time, or rather almost real-time, cloth dynamics. So this is something that I've made earlier, and this is, don't worry about the hair, but it's just the skirt that has proper cloth physics applied. So it's a bit like D-Force. It's not quite real-time, it's sort of going that way, but you need really, really powerful hardware to make that happen. Let me show you how it works, and hope you learned something today. First of all, in Unreal Engine, let's go and enable a couple of plugins that ship with Unreal Engine. So you head over to Edit Plugins, and then you search for Cloth over here, and then you'll find three of them really. The first one is enabled by default, Chaos Cloth, and then the second one is the Chaos Cloth Asset. That's the one that we need, beta, and the other one is the Chaos Cloth Asset Editor, also beta. So beta means that they're working on it right now. User experience might not be, fantastic. It's better than experimental, which means it's completely unstable. But these two are currently, as of 5.4 in June 2024, is pretty unstable. So get used to the engine maybe crashing and stuff. So these need to be enabled. I've also enabled the DAZ to Unreal bridge from David's GitHub repository, and I'll go straight into DAZ Studio, and we'll start with my girl Zahara here, one of the new Genesis 9 characters, and I'm using this Venom outfit here by my friend Chris Cox, available from the DAZ store for Genesis 8 and 9. So this comes with two parts, a top and a skirt, so I thought we were going to go through this process twice just to get a little bit of practice in. So typically you would head over and you select your character, and you head over to File, Send to DAZ to Unreal, and you go and send everything over as a skeletal mesh. But what that'll do is it'll merge clothing and character and hair and anything that is parented underneath the top node here together. So we don't want to do that. In my case, I want to send over the character without clothing and then the clothing separately. But the clothing, as you can see, so that's down here, Venom top and Venom skirt, these items are already fitted. So if I go to right click here and fit to, then I see that they are both fitted to my character, and that's what I want, because that means those items take on the shape of the character. It's follower clothing in that respect, so that's exactly what we want. However, we don't want them to be parented, so I'll go and select both of them, and then I'll left click and drag them just out of the hierarchy here, and that means those are now separate. And if I go click on Zahara here, or my character, into File, Send to DAZ to Unreal, I can go and send her over as a separate mesh. So the hair is still attached, shoes would be attached if they'd be here, but there's no clothing here. So just to show you what that looks like in Unreal Engine, that's where we are. Here's Zahara, there she is, with no clothing on, exactly what we want. That's perfect. Next is the clothing pieces. So those are not going to be sent over as skeletal meshes. I'm going to send those over as static meshes, but same thing. Select one item at a time, switch this over to static mesh, and then call it Venom top. And that happens significantly faster than a skeletal mesh. And this one is going to be sent to DAZ to Unreal. This is going to be Venom skirt. There we go. And then in Unreal Engine, we should have these two items here, Venom skirt and Venom top. Perfect. Control-Shift-S. And let's start with the top first, because that's the one that sort of works like follower clothing. It's barely visible with the black here, but it's going to be okay. So in here, I'm going to right-click and head over to Physics, and then I'll go to Cloth Asset. I'm going to create myself a new cloth asset. I'm going to call that one CA Venom top. Control-Shift-S, because it is a little bit buggy, and then I'll double click that to open that. This is going to create a second file under the hood, namely this one here, the data flow. I'll go and dock that over here, and the data flow is basically this whole node graph and a few other things, but the clothing asset file that brings in that node graph and also a few other things. It's a little bit beta, so I've got a lot of empty tabs here. This sort of depends on how many times Unreal Engine sort of crashes, and this looks much more dramatic than it really is. So there's a lot of nodes here, but everything that's orange is the stuff that we need to pay attention to and make a change in. So I'll go and zoom right into here and start with the first couple of nodes here. Set USD file and set a skeletal mesh for that. So, oh yeah, one other thing at the top here, these are our clothing properties like brush settings and all that. At the bottom here, I don't know if it's open for you, but there's no details that might be a little bit small. That's something that we really need to pay attention to, because if we select the node, this is when we need to do something. So this says USD import here because what they really want you to do is use the latest version of Marvelous Designer and then set up all the cloth properties for your clothing in there, including warp and weft and all that. And that will send over two meshes, a high-res mesh and the UVs and the textures, as well as a low-res simulation mesh, as well as all the simulation properties under the hood. And that's a really sophisticated workflow that I haven't explored yet, and we're not going to use it because we have static clothing from DAZ Studio. So let's go select the USD import node and delete it. Replace it with our own static mesh import node here. Let's click on that, and you can rename it if you like, but you don't have to hook that one up, and that's the only change that we need to make here. So with this static mesh import selected, in the node details here, I can now go and select my clothing item, namely the skirt. So Venom skirt, that's the one. Click on that. And then I can see it here in my viewport. This is what it would look like in the rendered view. And on the left-hand side here, I can see technically the clothing patterns. I mean, it's just the UVs, but I can switch those over from 2D to 3D or the rendered view. And this is an unsmoothed view of my clothing item so that the text just don't get in the way. So this is kind of cool. This is the first change that we've made. The second one here, transform positions. We don't have to change anything in there, but it's good to know that if you do want to change the size of your clothing or the position of your clothing, this is where to do that. So we don't have to do anything right now because we know our clothing fits. Transfer skin weights, that is where it gets interesting. So select that node, and over here under skeletal mesh, Unreal Engine needs to know what it can transfer the skin weights from. So this is exactly like transfer utility in DAZ Studio works. It has a skeletal rigged mesh which is skinned, and you transfer all those weight maps onto the item of clothing. That is what we do here. So my character was called Zahara. So I'm going to go and select her here. It takes a moment, and click on the node again, because otherwise this doesn't show up here. It's a little bug. There we go. If we do nothing else, this is now follower clothing. So I don't have to do anything else for this to work. And to prove it, I can go into my little viewport here. At the top here under the preview scene, I can pick my character again. So this is just for preview purposes here. And then I can see that the skirt fits her. You can also go and preview this with an animation over here under animation asset. I have one that's not quite at the right speed, but it is working here. So this is raising the roof. If you go and play that, then it's half the speed, but you can tell that the skirt is moving with the figure. So all the weights have been mapped, which is pretty spectacular. And that's already all you need to do. If you have tight-fitting clothing, that is literally where your workflow can stop, and that's now follower clothing inside of Unreal Engine. Is that cool or what? But we can go one step further. We can actually go and add cloth dynamics to this if we want. So those are a little bit tricky because they're expensive to calculate, and we need a physics asset so that Unreal Engine knows what the clothing needs to collide with it. Sadly, I haven't figured out a way to use the regular character mesh for that. It needs to have a physics asset, and by default, let me go show you where that is. That is in our Zahara folder. Every time you import a skeletal mesh, Unreal Engine creates this physics asset here. So if I go and open that up, you can see all these large capsules here, and the hip is sort of on an angle here. I don't know why, but that's just, you know, what the default looks like, and that's not great. But let's use it and then generate our own in a moment here. So let's go further here over to paint the max distance. That is, if we click that node, we can go and weight map the skirt. So I can go and use my brush tool here with the paint mode, and I can left click and drag on the bottom of the skirt, and anything that's painted in white will now move a max distance away from the regular skinned vertex position, if you will. So you can either paint that. There's also a way to smooth that. So from paint, switch that to smooth, and then left click and drag over this, and then it smooths this out. So that means there's now a gradient applied. From black means there's no physics simulation to white means there's full physics simulation. You can do that, but there's other tricks that you can do here. So there's also, instead of brush, you can also do fill or lasso, gradient, height triangles, and if black and white doesn't quite work for you, it's often good to switch to white and red. And then, you know, white means it's not simulating, and red means that's where the most amount of simulation works. Sometimes with 2D pattern pieces, it's actually easier to go and switch this over to 2D sim, go back to the brush and paint, and then just click on the pattern that then gets flood filled with one value, which is, you know, very practical. So we can do that. We can then switch back to 3D sim. If you're familiar with Marvelous Designer, this is very, very similar, and it's very cool to have all these tools inside of Unreal Engine. So as I said, this is in beta. I might go and I just go and smooth this out here a little bit at the top, just so that we have a little gradient going over here. But I can see that this is going places, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this is going. So currently the navigation is like in Maya here in this little window. Alt left click to move around, and the mouse wheel scrolls. You can also use the WASD navigation that we know from the regular viewport, but sadly they've also used some of these keys to change these options here. So it's weird when you go hold down the right mouse button, you go for W, then all of a sudden smoothing changes to paint mode, and it's all a bit weird. So it's all a bit beta. So alt left click in this viewport, please. And then once you're done, I think we can go and paint these guys in as well here. These straps. I think they're supposed to be metal pieces. Once we're done, we can hit accept, and then our cloth painting has happened. You can see in the preview here, this is what it looks like. So currently it doesn't collide with anything because we haven't set the physics asset yet. There's something else about the simulation here. If you click this little icon, then the simulation pauses, and I recommend you do that. When it's blue, it's paused, and that means Unreal Engine isn't going to calculate the preview here. And that's sort of important because I've seen it crash more when this is enabled and you make changes versus when it's, you know, not enabled. These nodes here, we can scroll right past them, but just so that you know what these are, in the USD file that comes with the new version of Marvelous Designer, the 2024 subscription version, these nodes grab parameters from the USD file, like warp and weft and all kinds of, you know, angular stiffness and stuff that I didn't even know existed. And it's all very much documented here. But if you do want to overwrite any of these things and you don't have Marvelous Designer, we can just click one of these nodes and then click one of these blue buttons and then give it a manual value here if you want to do that. I'm going to leave all the defaults now. There's just one node I want to bring to your attention that's just before the physics asset. That's where we need to do our next change here. That's this one, the simulation self-collision spheres config. If you want to make that active, it's not active by default here, it's not ticked. Then if you were to make that active, then the cloth would collide with itself. So again, it's very expensive to calculate, but it can be done, just so that you know. I'm going to go and select my physics asset node here, and then over here I'm going to specify that physics asset that I had there, which is Zahara, the default physics asset here. So I'm going to go and select that, wait a second, and then, you know, because I didn't have my simulation switched on, the skirt sort of pops out. The moment I go and switch that on, we go see a bit of a Marilyn Monroe accident here, and eventually, I suppose, let me go and play that animation. Eventually this should settle down. I guess it hasn't yet. But the physics asset itself doesn't look great. So it's got this massive thing sticking out there. But you can see how this is going as the animation progresses. The cloth is settling in, and that is how it now collides with the physics asset. But as I said, physics asset not so good right now. Let me go and pause this and in fact clear this out. And again, I'm just trying to prevent Unreal Engine from crashing. Here, stop the simulation, and I'll go back into my content browser, right click on my character and head over to create physics asset, and this is how I can make a new physics asset with some properties that look a little bit better. So instead of minimum bone size, I'm going to use 5 here instead of 20, and instead of the primitive type, I'm not going to use a capsule, I'm going to use a single convex hull. This is expensive to calculate, but it's going to look much better. So hull count, I'm going to make it maybe 16. You can go higher, but there's always a price to pay. So this is going to take a moment to create itself here. And it's done, throws up a little error message here. It's totally fine. We can totally ignore that. And here it is. So this looks very different than the previous one. It doesn't have these bulging pieces anymore, and it follows the contours of our figure much better. You can take these away. You can tweak them if you like, so that the top of the legs, they might be a little bit too thin. So there might still be clothing that might, that might collide with this. So I can go and drag my scale down a little bit and then just take this out a couple of notches here, into this direction and the other one as well. And then you can make all kinds of changes here if you have the patience to do that. I'm still figuring out a way to see if we can't just use something more high res out of the box, because I'm not really interested in real-time simulations for this. I'm just more interested in making this work in sequencer, which, by the way, you'll be happy to know, works out of the box. So this is our physics asset here. I'm going to go Control-Shift-S, and I'm going to rename this as well, so I remember which one the one was that I created. So I'm going to call that PA for physics asset Zahara. And once that is saved, I can go and put that into our physics asset node here, PA Zahara. And is Unreal Engine going to survive this, or is it going to crash? It's going to crash. That's just how it happens. So as I said, beta, let me just go restart it and try again. And we're back. With hopefully this time not so much crashing here. So physics asset, let me go and pick that again from the list, and will it work? Yes, look at that, it works now. I've actually just realized that I've misnamed the assets here. I'm working with the skirt, but it's actually called top. Let's just go rename that in a second. That's just something to be aware of. So if I go and preview this with an animation, we can see that the cloth is indeed simulating. So that is pretty cool. Let me go and do this again for the actual top, even though this is already called top here. Let me go and close this down and basically repeat the process. So I'm going to go and actually, I don't know what happens if I rename that Venom, if I call that one skirt, because that technically is a skirt. Does that still work? This is gray area. I don't really know. Yeah, look at that. Okay, so this is called Venom skirt. This is perfect. And I'm going to maybe put that into the skirt folder. Move that here, just so that that's where that is now. And in the top, let me go and create another physics asset. Here's a cloth asset. This one's going to be fast. So CA Venom top 2, just so that there's no issues around that. Sorry about that little confusion here. So this is our actual top. And once again, the first thing that we're going to do, head over to the first node and disregard the USD import, delete that, and bring in our own static mesh import. There's actually two. There's static mesh and static mesh import, so make sure you use the import node. Put that into here, and then with static mesh selected, you're going to pick the static mesh that you've just picked up from DAZ Studio. So that is the top. Enable, and then here under set a skeletal mesh, that is the character that we need to transfer weights from. So in our case, that's Zahara. Here we go. And because we're anticipating there not to be any movement, we're going to just leave everything as it is and hit Control-Shift-S and bring in our preview character over here. Press F, and here it is. So that's perfect with our animation once again. There's currently no cloth physics on here, but I could paint the bottom of the top so that it wafts around a little bit. I'll leave that up to you just with the brush tools, and that'll be really easy. Right now, it just follows the character no matter what they do. And then if you wanted to have the cloth dynamics, you just head over to the next node here. paint the max distance, and then go and paint on this as you see fit. So maybe like the bottom here, and then you also have to give it a physics asset, and then you're done. So that's how you do that. So that is the clothing created, but then how do we use it in Sequencer or in our viewport here? That is best done with a blueprint. So the way that works, I'm going to go back into my Zahara folder here and create myself a new blueprint class. Just a simple actor will do in this case. I'm going to call that BP Zahara. Open that up. And here I'm going to need one skeletal mesh, which is going to be for the actual character. I'm going to call that one Daz Mesh so that we know what that is. And then over here under Mesh, I'm going to pick Zahara. There she is. And I'm also going to need 2 Chaos Cloth components here. So just type in cloth at the top here, and then you see Chaos Cloth component. And I'm going to go and parent that to the Daz Mesh. I'm going to need 2 of them, so Control D to duplicate that. And one is going to be called the top, and another one is going to be called the skirt or the bottom. So you can swap these out. You can name them anything you like. Top on the right hand side here gets our clothing asset that we've created, which is the Venom Top 2, the actual top. There it is. And then the skirt, same thing. On the skirt you go and pick the skirt, and that is our character. So you can preview that here, or we can go straight into the viewport and go and animate it there. So that I can also show you how to render this out. So that's kind of cool as well. You don't have to use anything special. Sometimes, or basically back in the day, anything that had to do with chaos simulations usually required a chaos cache manager. And that is a device that would record the simulated cache and then play it back frame accurately. So in Unreal Engine, you can either simulate or you can render, but you can't do both things at the same time, or at least you never used to be able to. And Chaos Cloth can. So Chaos Cloth can be real-time simulated even when you're in the sequencer, which is kind of cool. Let's go and bring in a new level sequence. I'll call that Zahara Demo. I'm going to select my blueprint here and add her to the sequencer. And because it's a blueprint, I need to click that plus icon and target the Daz Mesh component, which is the skeletal mesh component in there. And that can receive my animation, which is raise the roof. This is one I brought in from the heat bridge, by the way. And if I do that, it comes in with pretty much the wrong playback speed. So let me just go and quickly adjust that. That's right clicking on the animation under properties, and we'll give that the play rate of 2. And then it's twice as fast. And then we can go and duplicate that a couple of times here, maybe. Play that back, and there we go. So the clothing follows, and currently it's not simulating in our preview, and that's just fine. That's how the cookie crumbles. If you did want to do that, then we can go and pick simulate mode over here, Alt S, wait a second. Also something nice that we should perhaps talk about in a later video. As you render this out, you need to have something like a resting period so that the cloth, as it starts simulating when we render this out, it just needs to have that resting period, a little bit like defaults on the timeline, just needs to rest, and then we start the animation. So might show you how to do that in another video. For now, you can see it simulates, and that's just exactly what we want. So for rendering then, let me go and stop this and go and click this little icon here, which will then bring up Movie Render Queue. That is actually another plugin. It happens to be enabled on my system here already, but if you search for movie, then there is the Movie Render Queue. That's the one that you need to enable, and then you have this setup. If you don't do that, then you have this legacy thing that isn't working great. So let me go and click into here. Don't use a JPEG sequence. Let's use a PNG sequence without the transparency. And the output directory is going to be this, and I might even go and save that as render settings so that I can bring it back if I needed to do that. That's that. Now we need to go and click render local, and then whoa, hang on a minute, I haven't defined the camera yet, have I? Otherwise it's just going to go and render that. We don't want to see that, so let me go and cancel out of that. Sorry about the camera, I totally forgot about that. So camera, we can only ever render a camera, so that should be. Is this a good look here? This might be fair. Okay, it's not great, the framing, but it's just about the cloth. So let me go and do that. And also, actually, since we do have automatic depth of field here, let me go and track my character. There she is. And that should be that. So now we have a camera cuts track and we have a camera, and that can now be rendered out. So do that. Pick my render settings, check that it's still okay. Hit accept and render local, and now we're going to render our camera. And this is the sort of mystery thing that I explained to you in the beginning. So we really need that 2, 3, 5 second resting period for this to work. But as you can see, it simulates while it's rendering in sequencer, and that is pretty exciting, I have to say. And here's our final render, and it really didn't take that long, I have to say. This is really, really cool. I'm excited about this because it avoids all these poke-through issues, and it means we get very easy cloth dynamics now in Unreal Engine. I have no doubt that the system is gonna mature over the next few months, years. So this was available in 5.3, but we didn't have the node graph, so you had to know what the nodes were called. So it's kind of funny to having to recall that from memory. So in 5.4, they've added these nodes, and also much thanks to Mr. Tim Brackenseed for putting a great documentation on this together, because that's basically what I've followed. I've got my own article on my website that I'll leave a link to in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Have fun with this, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.